Hello, my name is Caleb Denby, and welcome back to Game Review. Today, we're going to be taking a look at this game between Magnus Carlsen and Anish Giri. In this one, we did see Magnus playing the move 1d4 again. We see knight f6, c4, e6, and then in this Chessable Masters final against Anish, we did see him play knight c3 and go for a very interesting a3 nimzo. In this game, however, he's back to the usual with knight f3. This is what top grandmasters are usually playing against this move order from black to avoid the nimzo Indian altogether with knight c3 and bishop b4. Knight f3 forces black to make one more move, and now after d5, we do see the move knight c3. Now, black less often commits to this move bishop b4 after the move d5 has been played, because it limits his options pretty drastically by already having this pawn out here on d5. Anish goes for the Semi-Tarrasch with the move c5. The Tarrasch, of course, is just doing this all directly, move 1, 2, 3. With the move knight f6 included, it is the Semi-Tarrasch. And with this pawn structure, we do see black taking a very combative approach to the center from the get-go here. None of this waiting around in the QGD, waiting for the right moment to play c5 or take on c4. Black is saying, I am putting the maximum pressure on the center as quickly as possible. And in this line, we do see black going for a line that starts to look pretty similar to the Grunfeld, if you are familiar. So we see the move c takes d5, and now the move e takes d5 isn't going to be the most comfortable for black. You end up in some IQP positions with this Isolani here on d5. Generally, at some point, these two pawns get traded, and white can play for pressure against this guy, or after a move like b6, pressure against the hanging pawn center as well. So after cd5, we do see the move knight takes d5. This is by far much more common. And now the move e4 takes control of the center, and this is what I mean by it looks a little bit similar to the Grunfeld. We have knight takes c3, b takes c3, and we have this sort of Grunfeld structure. There is a very key difference here compared to the Grunfeld. Well, actually, a couple key differences. One being the fact that black has already committed to the move e6 and already has the move c5 in, means that his play is actually coming a little bit faster, perhaps, compared to when g6 and bishop g7 are on the board. Now, of course, g6 and bishop g7 on the board also changes things pretty dramatically. Now, after c takes d4 and c takes d4, black is actually just going to trade this bishop off rather than go for the superstar Grunfeld bishop that Grunfeld players are very familiar with. And this is sort of the key difference here. So bishop b4 is a check, bishop d2 is the response, and now bishop takes d2, queen takes d2. And this is sort of the starting position for the opening. Black generally always castles here. Now, white does have various options from this point forward, but with this pawn on e6, the good news for white is that that means that this bishop has no access to the g4 square, which means this knight is sitting comfortably on f3, and there's no need to put a bishop on e2 or anything of this manner. So the bishop comes to the more natural square on c4, putting some pressure on the light squares for black. Now the move I'm actually more familiar with here is the move knight c6, and the ideas kind of follow with b6 and knight a5, hitting the bishop. Then you see bishop b7, rook c8, and from what I have usually seen, this rook and the knight work in tandem to control squares on the c-file, and black has a pretty good game. In this game, Anish Giri actually goes for the other option with knight to d7. And the idea of this one is to actually more directly pressure the pawn on e4. Rather than go for more normal Grunfeld type plans with knight c6 and a5, Anish is putting this knight on f6, challenging e4 and challenging the d5 square as well. These light squares in the center more directly. We have castles, and of course b6 is the natural follow-up. Rook a to d1 is the world champion's choice. Bishop b7, and now rook f to e1 is the other natural square for the rook. So far, so normal. We see rook c8 hitting the bishop, so bishop b3. Backing on up, we have rook e8 by Anish Giri, preparing for the move d5, in which case the e-file might open up. And in fact, d5 is a move that has been played here historically. After e d5, This is just a perfectly playable position for black. This knight comes out to a very natural square on c5, and white does have this passed d-pawn, but if black plays well, he should be able to corral this pawn without too much difficulty. And there are a number of games here by players such as Dave Navarra, Wesley So, Sam Sevian, Lenier Dominguez, but this is not what we see here today. Instead, Magnus Carlsen chooses a slightly less common move from this position, and that move is rook to e3. And this one is sort of a head scratcher. Anish plays the move knight f6, which is very, very natural, and then generally, I always felt like the idea of rook e3 was to back this rook up with something like queen e1, guarding this e4 pawn. But this is not what Magnus chooses to do. Instead, he simply plays the move d5 immediately. And this is raising some question marks in my mind as to why Magnus felt the need to put this rook on e3. But the play becomes a lot more clear after the next move here. ed5, e5, knight e4, and now the point is the e1 square is vacant for the queen, and Magnus was not playing to recapture on d5, going for the past d-pawn scenarios. Instead, he wants this pawn on e5, and now with this setup, having this rook on e3 makes a ton of sense. Not necessarily to support the e-pawn from behind, although this is very, very relevant, but also to give him these options of bringing this rook over to the king's side and trying to checkmate the black king. This is what Magnus Carlsen is playing for here, not some past d-pawn sort of drawish looking position. He wants d5 takes e5, going for the maximum. So knight e4, queen e1 is played in the game. We see queen c7, and then Magnus Carlsen's next move is very, very professional. This is a horribly difficult type of position, and if I were to achieve a position like this in one of my own games, I definitely would be taking this pawn on d5, rook takes d5, and, you know, kind of cutting my losses, like, okay, all right, got my pawn back, thank goodness. I had to trade my bishop for it. I don't care, get me out of this game. But if Magnus had done this, honestly, he might end up slightly worse, because if you don't make immediate use of this e5 pawn, it is going to turn out to be a weakness, and then it's black with the better endgame with this queenside majority. For example, a move like knight c5, this knight can come back to e6, and then black is doing very, very well here. Instead, Magnus Carlsen says, what, this pawn? Yeah, I don't need this pawn, and plays knight d4, undefending this pawn from the only piece that had it covered. Now the point of rook e3 and queen e1 is shining through once again. This pawn is not capturable due to the move f3 when these pieces are working very, very well together. So e5 sort of indirectly defended here via some tactics. The move a6 comes on the board, very natural by Anish, wanting to stop knight b5 to d6. And now we get to the clown pushing segment of the game, where Magnus plays the move h4. And, you know, say what you will about this move, but Magnus Carlsen is playing white in a rapid game. He's trying to checkmate his opponent with this pawn on e5. He's going all in, so why not include the move h4, controlling this g5 square. Fun stuff, fun stuff. Now, Anish's next move is honestly not my favorite by any stretch of the word. The move rook c to d8 was his choice. And I mean, this move is like, it's defending the d-pawn, but if I'm black in this game, I'm saying, all right, if I don't get checkmated, I have a very good position. All I need to do is not get checkmated. And the focus, in my opinion, should really be on that and that alone. Rook c d8 is a move defending a pawn, but we don't even care if white takes this pawn. White had his chance to take this pawn. He did not do it. Why would he do it now? So I think some defensive moves really would have served black a little bit better here. You could consider playing the move h6, the point being you're getting h5, h6 ideas out of the way before they ever get started. Other moves would include something like queen c5, just aiming at some more central squares with this queen, and a move like b5 as well, just sort of expanding on the queen side and getting some counterplay over here rather than just kind of a tempo-losing move like rook c to d8. So now Magnus takes this tempo and runs with it, playing the move f3, the natural move to kick this knight away. the knight comes to c5, and now, wasting no time at all, Magnus says, h5, I am here knocking at your door, please let me in. Knight e6 was the move by Anish Giri. This is a great square for the knight, taking up a defensive outpost, but now knight f5 by Magnus is the natural way to go. Just slowly but surely centering these pieces around the black king's side. d4 now by black is an attempt to get some activity for himself, and this is sort of the justification for the move rook c to d8, but it still doesn't make that much sense in my opinion. He's trying to push this d pawn forward to make it relevant, but there were better ways, I think, to defend the king side for black. Rook e to d3 now by Magnus Carlsen. Knight c5 is an attempt to challenge this rook on d3. We have rook takes d4, and rook d4. Now, Anish tries to get pieces off the board with knight takes b3, and rather than capture this back, the tactics sort of begin here for Magnus, throwing in the move queen g3, threatening, of course, a checkmate, so no time to do anything on this side of the board. g6, and now Magnus does capture this guy back. And now after the move rook d8, it's time for you guys at home to start trying to play like the world champion Magnus Carlsen. So white to move and absolutely crush your opponent here. There is more than one winning move here, but Magnus's, I think, is the most beautiful. So try and find the beauteous way to win this game. Of course, the move, if you're watching at home, is the move e6. And this is just devastating for Anish. This is a discovered attack on the queen, and not only that, it is still threatening the move rook takes d8 with checkmate. It's also threatening to rip open the king side with something like e takes f7, and this is just game over. Queen c1 is a check. We see king h2, and now with the queen removed from the threat of capture, Anish goes ahead and takes on d4. But now I know everybody at home saw the justification behind this move, e6. The move, of course, here to win for white is the move e7. And now promotion is quite simply difficult to stop. Queen c8 was Anish's try, but now queen e5 attacks a rook, attacks checkmate, threatens e8 queen, also with checkmate, and there's simply nothing to do here for black. Rook h4 was the try, and now king g3 is forcing resignation from Anish. Another beautiful game by the world champion here, and a really instructive attacking game, showing how to make use of this e5 pawn. These are positions that honestly I have struggled with myself. It always feels as though the attack sort of fizzles out and then my e5 pawn just becomes a weakness. But this game's showing how to use it to attack this knight, not being able to come back to f6 due to e5, and then the pawn itself becoming a relevant attacker with the moves e6 and e7. Beautiful stuff by Magnus Carlsen. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Game Review. My name is Caleb Denby, and I will see you next time.